Hello, dear and well-wishing viewers of Aspect English. How are you all? I hope everyone is doing well. Today's topic of discussion is a powerful psychological technique that has been widely used in people's lives, relationships, business, and influence building for a long time. The name of this technique is reverse psychology. It is a method where, instead of directly asking someone to do something, you present it in the opposite way so that the person becomes interested in doing that task of their own free will. Reverse psychology plays a significant role in understanding human thought processes, decision-making, and behavior. It is not magic. Rather, it is a powerful psychological strategy based on understanding how the human brain thinks, makes decisions, and responds. Often we see that some people can get others to do what they want without giving direct orders. The reason is that they don't force or control anyone. Instead, they create a situation where people willingly make decisions that align with the person's goal. In today's discussion, we will learn about 13 important psychological principles that deeply influence human thinking, decision-making, and behavior. Have you ever wondered how some people can get others to do exactly what they want without giving any orders, without forcing, and without getting into arguments? They don't compel anyone. Rather, they create a situation where people themselves start making decisions that match the other person's objective. This is not any magic spell. This is reverse psychology, a subtle technique of the human mind, built on the understanding of how people think and make decisions. Many great strategists in history have understood and used these psychological principles in politics, business, personal relationships, and various fields of influence. Some view it as manipulation or trickery, while others describe it as a psychological strategy or tactic. However, the reality is that without understanding how the human mind works, it is never possible to fully grasp the true power of influence. In today's discussion, we will learn about the 13 Machiavellian principles of reverse psychology, which can have a profound impact on people's thoughts, decisions, and behavior. These are principles that help us understand how people think, make decisions, and how their behavior can be influenced. But remember, this knowledge is as powerful as it is important to use responsibly. If used incorrectly, it can have negative consequences. Law 1. Illusion of choice. The human mind is not like direct orders. When someone tells us, "Do this task right now," a small resistance naturally arises within the mind. This resistance is not always visible from the outside, but inside the brain, a question emerges. Why am I being told to do this? Because humans inherently want to preserve their freedom. Everyone wants to feel that their decisions come from their own will and thoughts. This is why, instead of giving direct instructions, if you offer someone options or a sense of choice, they accept the matter as their own decision. This psychological tendency is called the illusion of choice. And this is exactly where the first and most fascinating technique of reverse psychology begins: illusion of choice. The core idea is to give a person the feeling that the decision is entirely their own, while the direction of the situation has already been predetermined. Suppose you directly tell someone, "Do this task right now." Many times, they may hesitate, delay, or make excuses, because a direct command can create natural resistance in people. But if the same thing is said slightly differently, "Do you want to do this task now or after an hour?" the situation completely changes. Now the person feels that they have been given a choice or the freedom to decide. It feels to them that the decision is completely their own. However, in reality, both options have been structured in such a way that they lead toward the desired outcome. That is, it guides their decision in the direction you want. This is what is called the illusion of choice. For example, suppose a parent tells their child, "Go and sit down to study." The child might reply, "I'll study a little later." But in the same situation, if the parent says, "Will you do math first or science?" the whole dynamic changes. Now the child is no longer thinking about avoiding study. Instead, they start thinking about which subject to study first, because both given options are limited to studying. This is the real power of this technique. When people are given the opportunity to choose between options, their mind remains relatively calm, and they feel that they made the decision themselves. Because one of the most effective ways to influence human behavior is to give them the feeling that the power of control lies in their own hands. Law 2. Forbidden fruit effect. One of the strange characteristics of a human mind is that we often lose interest and value in things that are easily available. But when a restriction or prohibition is placed on something, that very thing suddenly starts to feel much more attractive. A perfect example of this can be found in the story of Adam and Eve. In paradise, they were allowed to enjoy almost everything, except they were forbidden to eat the fruit from just one tree. And it was precisely because of that prohibition that the fruit became the most attractive and intriguing thing to them. In psychology, this tendency is called the forbidden fruit effect, where something becomes even more desirable in people's minds when it is restricted or forbidden. When a prohibition is placed on something, people's attraction to it can increase many times over. Because a ban doesn't just create a rule, it also generates curiosity and interest in the human mind. This is why many brands use phrases like limited edition, only for members, or exclusive access for their products. These words don't just provide information, they send a special signal to our brain that this item is not easily available to everyone. As a result, even an ordinary thing starts to feel special and valuable to us. The human brain often perceives restrictions as a challenge. When something feels limited or secret, the desire to know about it or obtain it becomes even stronger. This curiosity drives people to want to break the prohibition or become highly interested in learning about the restricted thing. And this psychological tendency is known as the forbidden fruit effect. Law 3. Power of silence. Being influential does not mean you have to talk constantly or respond immediately in every situation. Often, the most powerful messages are created from the words that are left unsaid. This is the power of silence. Silence can create a kind of mental pressure and uncertainty in people's minds. Imagine you are sitting in an interview. The interviewer asks you a question, and you give your answer. After that, they say nothing and simply keep looking at you. After a few seconds of silence, you may start to feel uncomfortable. Questions may arise in your mind. Was my answer incomplete? Or should I have said more? Because of this discomfort, people often begin to speak more on their own and end up revealing more information than necessary. This is the power of silence, where silence itself creates a powerful psychological effect. The human brain generally finds it difficult to handle prolonged silence. When an empty space is created in a conversation, people naturally try to fill that silence and often start talking themselves. Therefore, there is no need to answer every question immediately. A few moments of silence at the right time can often be far more powerful than a long speech. Because silence is not just about staying quiet, it is a psychological strategy that encourages people to think, react, and sometimes reveal more than they intended, without even realizing it. Interesting fact. Experienced diplomats in various state affairs often use this technique, where even important national information can slip out during the flow of conversation. Law 4. Strategic surrender. Victory does not always come through displaying strength or direct confrontation. Often, the most effective strategy is to step back temporarily. At first glance, this may appear to be defeat, but in many situations, this very move paves the way for greater future success. This technique is called strategic surrender. When we strongly oppose something, it can naturally create even more resistance in the other person. But when that pressure or opposition is reduced, it creates space for their thinking to change. Sometimes, stepping back temporarily does not mean losing. Rather, it can be a smart strategy to turn the situation in your favor. Suppose two people are arguing over an issue. If you immediately try to prove the other person wrong, the argument often becomes more intense. But if, in the middle of that argument, you suddenly say, "Maybe you're right," the entire situation can shift. The person who had mentally prepared a defense to protect their position may suddenly calm down, because they no longer feel the need to prove themselves or continue the fight. After that, they get the opportunity to rethink their own words with a fresh perspective. Because winning every argument is not the most important thing. Often, the wisest approach is to step away from the argument, keep the situation calm, and take the right action at the right time. Law 5. Mirror of narcissism. Deep within every person's mind lies a natural desire to feel important, valuable, and special. When you highlight someone's good qualities and show them a positive image of themselves, they often begin to behave in alignment with that image. For example, if you tell someone, "You are a very responsible person," although it may sound like a simple compliment, there is a deep psychological effect behind it. After hearing this, a picture of themselves as a responsible person forms in their mind. Afterward, they may unconsciously try to behave in a way that matches that identity, because people generally do not want to destroy the positive image they have of themselves. However, this technique works effectively only when the praise feels genuine, sincere, and natural. Artificial or false flattery can often backfire and produce the opposite effect. Law 6. Anxiety of freedom. We usually think that the more options or choices we have, the easier it will be to make a decision. But in reality, the opposite often happens. An excessive number of options can create confusion, hesitation, and fear of making a decision in people's minds. Suppose you go to a restaurant. If the menu has only 5 to 6 food items, it's easy to decide. But if there are 50 different items, you may become overwhelmed. Questions may arise in your mind. Which one will be the best? Am I making the right decision? Because of this overthinking, it often takes much longer to make a decision. In psychology, this tendency is known as choice overload. Therefore, in many situations, instead of presenting every possible option, it can be more effective to offer a limited number of relevant choices. Because the human mind feels more comfortable with clear direction and simple decision-making than with infinite possibilities. Law 7. Ego challenge technique. Sometimes, a person's ego can serve as a much stronger motivator than logic or praise. When someone is told, "Maybe this task is beyond your ability," many people take it as a challenge. A question immediately arises in their mind, "Why can't I do it?" And at that moment, their ego becomes activated. Their goal is no longer just to complete the task. A strong desire to prove themselves also emerges. In the world of sports, coaches often use this psychological technique. When a player gets tired, if the coach says, "Maybe you're not ready for this level," the player may push themselves even harder to prove their capability. However, this technique is effective only when it is used in the right situation and with positive intent. Law 8. False weakness strategy. Sometimes the most effective strategy is to present yourself as ordinary or even slightly weak instead of showing yourself as overly powerful. People who constantly display their power and ability often make others cautious and cause them to control their own behavior. But when someone presents themselves as calm, ordinary, or less competitive, others' level of caution can drop significantly. For example, in a negotiation or business deal, if one person behaves very aggressively from the start, the other party will naturally try to keep their information and position hidden. However, if that person behaves calmly and naturally, the other party is more likely to open up and reveal their thoughts or important information. True intelligence is not always about displaying strength. Often, the real strategy lies in controlling your power and plans at the right moment. Law 9. Implanted idea. People generally do not like to accept decisions that are imposed on them by others. But if the same decision feels like it came from their own thoughts, they show much greater belief and interest in it. Instead of directly instructing someone to do something, if you give them the opportunity to think through questions, they often reach that conclusion themselves. For example, instead of directly saying, "This is the best method," you can say, "Don't you think this method might be a bit better?" This kind of question encourages the person's brain to think. And when a person reaches a decision on their own, that decision feels far more important and acceptable to them. This psychological process is called the implanted idea. Law 10. Contrast principle. The human brain does not usually judge anything in isolation. Instead, we almost always determine the value or importance of something through comparison. Suppose you go to a store. First, you're shown a product priced at $500. Naturally, you might think, "This is very expensive." Then, if you are shown another product priced at $100, that same $100 item will suddenly feel much cheaper in comparison. However, if the $100 product had been shown first, you might have considered it expensive too. This is the contrast principle. Because of this principle, people do not decide based on the actual value of something, but rather on the basis of comparison with surrounding options. Experienced people in big negotiations or discussions often start by presenting a large proposal first. This makes the subsequent proposal or the actual price seem more reasonable and acceptable by comparison. Law 11. Constructive pessimism. It is not true that people are always most motivated by constant praise alone. Sometimes, a little doubt or challenge can also serve as a powerful motivator. When someone is told, "I don't think this is possible," many people take it as a challenge. A desire arises in their mind, "I will prove that I can do it." After that, the task is no longer just a regular responsibility. It becomes a matter of proving one's own ability. However, caution must be exercised when using this technique. The expression of doubt should not contain insult or negativity. Instead, it should be presented in such a way that it acts as a positive challenge to help the person improve. Law 12. Strategic withdrawal. Things that are always easily available often lose their value in people's eyes. But people show much greater interest and appreciation for things that are limited or rare. If you are always available and accessible to everyone, people often start taking your presence for granted. However, when you create some distance occasionally, people can feel your absence and realize your importance in a new way. In marketing, strategies like limited offer or time-limited opportunities also work on this same psychological principle. Law 13. Controlled incompetence. It is not always wise to present yourself as highly skilled and knowledgeable in every task, because the person who is known for doing everything very well may gradually be burdened with excessive responsibilities. As a result, work pressure and mental fatigue increase. In some cases, strategically admitting your limitations or areas of lower competence can also be a useful technique. This is called controlled incompetence. Through this approach, people understand which tasks you are most skilled at, and you can protect yourself from unnecessary responsibilities. Conclusion. These principles help us understand some deep behavioral patterns of the human mind. However, it is important to remember that influence and manipulation are not the same thing. This knowledge should not be used to control or harm others. Rather, it should be used to better understand people's thoughts, behavior, and psychology. In the long run, earning people's trust is the greatest power. If you enjoyed these deep topics on human psychology, power dynamics, and influence, stay with Aspect English. And always remember, the greatest power lies not in controlling others, but in deeply understanding human nature and the human mind.